On February 6, 2023, a 7.6 earthquake struck Turkey and Syria, killing nearly 60,000 people in Turkey, 9,000 in Syria. Who was there to save the animals? The woman who headed up the rescue team from PETA joins me next on the PETA Podcast. Welcome to the PETA Podcast. I'm Emil Guillermo, your host for this inside look at animal rights, brought to you by PETA, the largest animal rights organization in the world. On today's episode, within days of an earthquake hitting Turkey and Syria, thanks to PETA's Global Compassion Fund, PETA sent out a small rescue team to help save as many companion animals that they could. Led by Bekhechi, Vice President of PETA UK, Europe, and Australia, the team spent a month in Turkey and worked remotely with vets in Syria to help animals there. In my conversation with Bekhechi, she described the devastation she saw and how they came to save hundreds of animals. There were cats like Thalia, who was found with a broken pelvis, another named Lucky, who now has a new home, and then there's Baloo, who was rescued and united with his 16-year-old companion. The happy stories of a tragedy that continues even when you don't see it on the news. My conversation with Bekhechi on PETA's effort to save the animals after the earthquake in Turkey and Syria on the PETA Podcast. Mimi, thanks for being with us. It's been a while.
Yeah,
I mean,
it has, yeah.
Usually you're disrupting dog shows, and and now you're trying to save entire countries from the ravages of earthquakes. So,
well, we do what we can.
I know. Well, I wanted to get you on soon because with every day it seems like the earthquake passes, moves on, is no longer news. Is kind of wiped off the mindset, the news mindset of editors and people who talk about things happening in the world, but the need's still there, right? I mean, it doesn't go away.
Oh, massively. The country, Turkey, where we were working, parts of that country have just been utterly devastated. Whole cities have just been razed to the ground. And, the areas where we were working, Elbistan and Marash and Antakya, where they were really the epicenter of the earthquake, we were there for over a month. There's so much need still there. The animals that are still there are desperate. It's not the same situation at the beginning when we started, where it was a race against time to get animals that were still trapped in buildings out. That was the first few weeks where we were, receiving reports literally every minute of, 3 cats in an apartment on the 5th floor over here, dog with a broken leg over here. Now it's more a case of the bulldozers are coming in. They're tearing down what's left of any of the buildings that are still partially standing in order to rebuild. And we have so many cats there that are still trying to survive on the streets. But a lot of them now, because it's, they're in heat, it's the spring, and they're looking for safe places to have their babies. And they're going into these derelict buildings, into basements and things where they think that that's going to be a safe place. But they don't realize, of course, that the bulldozers are about to come in and just wipe out the rest of what remains. So it's a really risky place for them. So the last time that we were there, earlier this month, what we were doing really in Antakya was trying to trap as many of those cats as possible, and take them out of that really dangerous place, and make sure that they are able to have their babies safely. And we were taking them to the clinics in Antakya. A lot of them have been moved to partner clinics in Istanbul now as well. We still have over 100 animals, I think, in our care between the 2 clinics that we've been working with in Adana, which is a couple of hours away, and then Istanbul, which is 10 hours away, caring for many of our animals, all of them traumatized and have had injuries, illnesses, and we're still taking care of them and trying to work with partner organizations to get as many animals out of Antakya as we can.
It's really incredible, though, what you're saying, that there are still some cats who have survived all this time. So it's been about, 2 months?
Yeah, it has. And, it's incredible some of the stories that we're still part of where these are cats who, some of them, of course, were stray cats that were living on the streets and already struggling to survive. But many of them are people's companion animals who are still miraculously alive. And, we've had so many beautiful stories. I think of one cat, his name was Baloo, and we found him wandering on the streets. He was obviously starving. We caught him. We brought him back to the vet in Adana that evening. I think we got back to the vet around 11 o'clock at night. They're very long days because we were staying in an area in a city called Adana, which is about a 2.5-hour drive away from Antakya, because you can't stay in Antakya. There's nothing there. So we were starting at 7 o'clock in the morning and not getting back to the vets until about 11 o'clock at night. That day we had Balul with us. And first thing we do, of course, is check for microchips. And he was microchipped, which is wonderful because we were then able to contact his family, and they were staying just an hour away. Turns out that his guardian is a 16-year-old girl called Elif. She was in a building with her grandparents when the building collapsed. Both of her grandparents died, and she was trapped in the rubble for 36 hours before her father and her uncle were able to dig her out. And she had never lost hope that she was going to find Balul again. And it had been weeks by the time that we found him. And they came immediately to the vet. I think they got there at, 12:30 at night or something. And it was just the most beautiful reunion to see them back together again. And she was just so happy to have him. They've lost everything. But that moment of being able to be reunited again with Balul was really pretty magical.
There's all these stories. I mean, that's a special story. And as you're saying that, I'm thinking, oh my God, what do these cats have to go through to survive? I mean, they're out there. I guess you forage among the rubble for whatever your I guess, food, for water. I mean, how do they do it?
The people in Turkey are incredibly loving towards animals, which was actually such a beautiful thing to see, because you would see food on the streets, so people are putting out food for them. But of course, there's not enough food and there's many, many animals. But they are somehow surviving. I mean, a lot of them are not, sadly, but it's not just the animals on the streets. There were, so much of the work at the beginning was trying to get animals out of buildings before, when the clock was really ticking, when they were trapped inside buildings. So we were working with, sometimes we'd get a story of cats in the fourth floor of a building, and there was no way of getting into that building except using a crane. So we were able to rent a crane, get in through the balcony, get to the animals that way.
You rented a crane to save an
Yes.
animal? I mean,
Yes.
A lot of people just think, oh, well, PETA's going to go off to the earthquake zone and they're just going to go after the low hanging fruit, the dogs and the cats that are out there. But you rented a crane.
Yes, we rented a crane. And in the situations where we weren't able to get the crane to the buildings, we were still with the reports of animals in seven-story apartments. We were having to crawl up crumbling stairwells up to the 7th floor. We had one report where there were 3 cats that were trapped inside a 4th floor apartment building. We managed to get up to the 4th floor by, crawling over the rubble up to the 4th floor. And then it took us, I think, over an hour to break down the front door before we were able to get into the flat. And when we got into that flat, it just looked like a bomb had gone off in there. Everything was broken. There was glass everywhere. All of the furniture had been destroyed. The wardrobes had, tipped over. And we just knew that there were 3 cats in this apartment, but we couldn't find them. They were obviously terrified and hiding. Eventually, we found them. 2 of them had actually burrowed into the sofas, and we needed to tear the fabric of the sofa apart in order to get to them. And at that point, they had been in their apartment for 14 days and were still alive. And fortunately, they were uninjured, but they were obviously starving and incredibly thirsty. So we were able to quickly feed them and give them water. And we heard from the people that have adopted them, and they're doing really great. So that's just one of the many, and it's not just cats. We rescued fish, we rescued birds, we rescued dogs. There's so many animals there that were really in desperate situation and needed help.
Tell me about the numbers, because after a couple months, it had to be in the hundreds. But what is the count so far as we speak in April?
It's over 300 animals that we have physically taken out that have either had, as I said, broken limbs, other injuries, diseases. And we have taken them to vets, and we've been working with vets in order to treat them. A lot of the treatments that they've had to receive are quite complicated. They've had complex injuries. The number of animals that we've been feeding is in the hundreds as well. So yes, it's a lot, but the need is so great.
Yeah, and still, I mean, like, we're talking about some things that you did early on. When the earthquake hit. How soon after the earthquake was PETA able to go into Turkey and Syria?
Oh, we were there within 2 days. Within 2 days, we were in Turkey, and we were there for a month. And as I said, we're still working with the vets and with other organizations that we're able to support with the medical treatment for the animals, and also with providing sterilization for animals in Antakya, and food that's being delivered there as well. But yeah, it's been a long journey. I mean, the very first dog that we rescued, Tarkan, we found him all alone and so sad in this area that had been evacuated in Marash, one of the worst affected cities. We thought that he was paralyzed because he wouldn't move, but I think he was just really sad. I think he had given up. And when we got him to the vet, we found out that actually one of his legs was broken, but he wasn't paralyzed. He was operated on, and he has had to spend weeks at the clinic recovering. But just last week, he was adopted finally.
Wow.
So he's now in his new home. I know, it's so great, because the change in him from when we first got him to now last week when he's been adopted by his new family is just incredible. He's so full of love. And they're just going to have so much joy in their life because of him.
Could you imagine what he might have gone through in order to survive? I mean, it's just incredible. I mean, I just remember the pictures of, the first week of the earthquake, and then suddenly you don't see anything or don't hear anything about the earthquake. And yet, that there are these dogs like this guy that you just described trying to survive, and he's found.
Yeah. And, in the first couple of weeks, we were just seeing constantly so many animals with, limping through the streets with broken legs, desperately searching for food, many of them with really other hideously painful injuries where probably, parts of buildings had collapsed on them, and they had big open wounds. And it wasn't just the physical injuries, because you could see in their faces and in their eyes the emotional trauma that they've experienced, because just like the humans that went through it, it's they've watched their whole worlds fall apart and collapse. Many of them are companion animals that are wondering now where their families are. They're not just hurt, but they're terrified. They're lonely. It's been great to be able to at least help some of them. But there's still so much need.
How about when you were out there? Did you happen to sometimes find people who needed help and needed rescue, your effort to help rescue them?
There are so many groups there helping people, and the police and the military are amazing. So whenever we're in whatever area we were, there was always a lot of support for people there. And if anything, it was, the police and the military regular citizens were coming up to us saying, please, there's this cat on the third floor, or please, there's this dog in an abandoned building. So we were actually being asked by the rescue workers who were there to help people if we could help the animals. So people who, Turkish people who had lost their homes and were there living in tents and really had nothing at all, kept always, trying to stop us, offering us tea or coffee or something to eat. The sense of camaraderie there is really quite special. And so the need for people was really for us to help them help their animals.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny because you're right. The first respondents would be going after the people to help the people, but who goes after the animals?
And, and it really is helping the people as well, because like I said, there's been so many stories now of us being able to reunite humans with their companion animals, and they've lost everything. But for them, those animals are their family, of course. Many of us share our lives in our homes with animals, and we know, they are part of the family. And the idea that you wouldn't know where they are or what's happened to them, or that the thought of them being alone on the streets or hurt or scared, and that's traumatic for the people there too. So being able to bring them back together has been a real privilege.
Yet at the same time, it shows where the priority was. Well, the priority should always be toward the humans, but there was, how many people were out there helping the animals besides PETA?
At the beginning, it was very chaotic. We were hearing reports. There were other people there helping as well, who were also sometimes hearing the same reports. You'd end up getting misinformation, because you would hear that there's a cat trapped in this building, and then somebody had already been there to help them out, which was great. But there were other people there also trying to help, but there was a real struggle to get information in real time. And I think that was one of the real challenging parts at the beginning. But like I said, the police and the military especially were really welcoming of us. And really one of the cats that we were able to trap, that we had spent 3 days trying to catch because she was so scared. We had been notified of her by one of the military men who was working in Antakya at the time. And he was desperate for us to get her. And then when we finally did, he took her and he adopted her, and he's been sending us pictures. So the military and the police have been really incredible in supporting us to support the animals of Turkey and reunite them with their families.
Well, tell me, how many of you were there out there helping these animals? It was just Mimi and
No, it wasn't just me. There was 4 of us.
Just 4?
There were 4 of us. Yeah.
That's not many. That's not many. I mean, you got an earthquake that has toppled or this, crippled these 2 countries, and they're just 4. That's like a really that's like a guerrilla unit out there trying to save animals.
There were, but we like I said, we didn't stop. We were working from the moment the sun rose until well after it fell. And we had 2 vans, and we were able to put a lot of animals into both of those vans. And, it's been quite a mammoth logistical task of trying to get the animals out of the earthquake zone. Where can we take them to that's going to be safe? Because, even though we were working with them, with the clinic in Adana, which was a couple of hours drive, that was also a city that had been affected. And many of the people that worked in the vet clinic were actually sleeping in tents because their buildings were unsafe, and they were still, there at midnight waiting for us to get there to help the animals, even though they were, going through a lot of trauma themselves and not able to go home. A lot of people were, and continue to be helping. So, yeah.
But just 4 of you guys from PETA. Did people know PETA? Did people say, "Oh, you're PETA. We know PETA. We'll here's some animals." Or, did they recognize that PETA does this sort of thing?
They were very, very happy to see us there. They were very happy for the support. As I said, it's a country that really loves animals, and especially the cats and dogs. They're beloved and members of the family. So they were very, very happy to see us there and trying to help us to do as much as we can to help as many animals in those areas. Yeah.
Did you have like a PETA T-shirts or a Red Cross, or did you have yellow? Or
we had our PETA shirts and our PETA Rescue Team jackets and our hard hats, and we had PETA emblazoned on our cars. So we were getting flagged down all the time. Wherever we were, people were trying to flag us down to say, please, we need you. There's our dog has been trapped upstairs for 8 days. Like, please help us. And we did.
And that's sort of the positive thing, people flagging you down because they need your help. But there's also an element of danger here. And tell me about were people flagging you down for the wrong reasons? What are you guys doing here? Right? PETA? You don't know who PETA is. I mean, tell me about the danger about going into this situation, and maybe even were there some political dangers when you went into Syria?
We haven't physically been into Syria yet. We're working on that. We're working on getting visas and able to go, but we have been supporting groups in Syria with provisions, and we're hopeful that we'll be able to get there soon. In Turkey, the dangers were really much more physical dangers than anything. Even though the first earthquake was obviously the biggest, there have been many earthquakes since. The buildings that are still standing, as I said, they're very dangerous buildings. They're unsafe to go into. The structures are still falling down. I think the biggest fear was really just that the going into the buildings that were very, very unstable. There were times when the military were not allowing us to go into the buildings. We were sometimes sneaking around and waiting for the military to leave before we would go into the buildings because they had told us that we couldn't go in. There were animals in there that needed to get out. And if we didn't go in, they were going to die in there. So it didn't really feel like much of a choice.
Yeah. Was there any kind of politics that came up? I mean, Turkey, you're PETA UK, but did people see PETA as PETA US, or was that even relevant when the need was all around?
No, it wasn't relevant, honestly. We didn't have the only issues that we had were sometimes with the police and the military that didn't want us to go into areas that were very dangerous. And but other than that, we only received just support. Everybody who was there was trying to, as I said, feed us, give us tea, look after us. They were really grateful that we had come to help them. And I don't think anybody cared about nationalities at that point. It was just, we were all humans, we were all animals, and everybody was in it together, really.
Yeah, and that's great to hear. And it's great also to see that PETA was recognized as the people who could come in and save these animals that were out there. Tell me more about, just say, how your day began, or how your day begins in terms of, you're there in Turkey. It would seem to me that just all you have to do is look around, and there's probably something or someone or an animal to save. But did you get tips? Did people call you? Did you? How did a typical day start?
We were getting tips all the time. There were a lot of groups on social media set up where people were giving information about their animals. So some people who had, suffered through the earthquake and were in hospital and desperate for somebody to go to their place to try to find their animals, to make sure that they were, to see if they were okay, if they were still alive. There were other instances where people had to flee, where animals had been lost and they were desperate to find them. So there's a lot of, and there still is a lot of information of missing animals, and at the time, addresses of where animals were trapped. So we would start our day with, getting into the car, crack of dawn, driving to whichever city it was that day, Elbistan, Antakya, Marash. By the time we got there, we had sorted out our day of where we were going, which apartment buildings we were going to. And then, things happened along the way, of course, because we were coming across animals where we'd have to stop. We'd see animals on the street, and one of them was dragging, like one cat, Thalia, that I remember, who was dragging herself across the street. And she was just, it was like she had flagged us down, really. She had made us stop, and we scooped her up. She was so happy for us to be there. And then it turns out she had a broken pelvis, and she's one of the ones that we had operated, and she's been rehomed, and she's really happy. But so for situations like that, we were constantly having to stop as well, because there were animals that were injured or had broken limbs that we were picking up along the way. And then, and for the first couple of weeks, it was really responding to the animals that were in the most danger, which is the animals that were trapped in the buildings with no way of getting out.
Hey, tell me about Lucky, the cat named Lucky. Do you recall?
Lucky. I do recall Lucky.
A little cat.
Yeah. Yeah. She, so as I said, it's chaos. There's bulldozers everywhere. There's dust everywhere. There's so much noise. And, it was towards the end of our day. We were in Antakya, and, we were heading back to the vet clinic in Adana. We had the car loaded with animals that needed help. And she darted in front of our car. And, from nowhere, she darted in front of the car. So obviously we slammed on the brakes, and then we got out and picked her up. I mean, she was another one that was so, jumped into our arms, basically, like couldn't wait, was basically saying, like, get me out of here. And so we did. Of course, she came with us. And we called her lucky because, she escaped death more than once that day. So
describe Lucky.
Oh, she's just such a little sweetheart. I mean, like you said, she's small. She's very young and so affectionate and so adorable and so much personality. She's just lovely. Yeah.
What happened to her?
Not so bright to jump in front of a car, or maybe she was, because that's actually what got her out of there. So, so she is one of the animals that was rehomed in Istanbul. Mm. So we were working with a shelter in Izmir, and also vegan advocacy groups in Istanbul and Ankara, who we have been working with in order to rehome animals, and also with the vets in Adana. But she was one that went to Istanbul.
Yeah. Now there's a picture of a cat, like a little, like a sort of orange tabby that she's just eating out of a can. And do you remember her? Do you remember?
I think. Well, I mean, there's more than a couple tabby cats, but I think that's Thalia, who I was telling you has the broken pelvis, she's doing great. She has a new family. She has a brother. We were sent a video of her last week where she's running around her new home, chasing her brother, and she just looks so happy. So yeah.
Now there's another cat. I'm just going over the cats that you've talked about, that the rescue team has talked about in the last few weeks. Uh-huh. The cat named Pisa. Do you recall?
Oh,
Pisa?
Yeah. Pisa lives in Virginia now.
Wow, an American.
Yes. Yes. We called her Pisa because she was rescued from a building that was, slanted sideways, the leaning tower. Exactly. And one of our team who had come over from the U.S., Alex, actually couldn't stand to be parted from her, and she made the trip back from Turkey all the way to the U.S. and now is living her best life in Virginia.
Wow, and those now recounting these stories, they help. They lift one's spirits about the terrible disaster there that continues to happen, but they're helpful to talk about these things.
They're not all happy stories. There was a lot of, animals that we weren't able to save, that were too far gone. And the kindest thing for them was to help end their suffering humanely. The tragedy of just the scale of the suffering. But yes, those stories where, we got to know these animals, each one of them, they all have their own personalities. They're all, either shy or feisty or playful, or every one of them an individual, and every one of them deserving of a happy life. And so being able to, like with Pisa and with Lucky and Thalia, being able to know that they're okay after the trauma that they've been through, it feels really good. Yeah. And,
we talked earlier about right now, cats are in heat. And the fact I was, when you said that, I was still shocked that, number one, they survived all these months, and to be able to be, the thinking about having babies, and then now they're forced to try to find a safe place to have their babies, and look at the choices they have. They rubble and better rubble and not as good rubble. And for all the survival skills to get them this far, they're still in danger. I mean, yes, that's a tragedy. They are in danger. And, we're doing as much as we can to
sterilize as many as we can. A lot of those animals were animals who were living on the streets before, and it was already incredibly hard, a very hard life. Now it's much, much harder. But we're working with partner vets to sterilize animals, to provide food and water. And for the animals that are companion animals, there are still many also companion animals, cats that are beloved family members that are still being found to this day. But yes, again, with them, it's really the desperate race against the clock to have them sterilized before they give birth, because it is not a good place for them to be giving birth. And it's also the stress on their bodies of pregnancy, of having to nurse their young in that situation as well, is just really, really bad for them. So still a lot of work to be done, and we need a lot of support with that too. So I hope that people are, even though Turkey and Syria is not necessarily on the news anymore, or in our social media feeds, the suffering is still really intense, and there's still a lot that needs to be done there. So I hope people continue to support the work.
Well, it's being supported by PETA's Global Compassion Fund, which relies on donations from people everywhere. And without the Global Compassion Fund, it would be very difficult to do things like rent a crane to help rescue a companion animal from a dilapidated building. But when are you planning to go back? I know you're doing other things, but when are you going to lead another team to go back, another effort?
We don't have anything set at the moment, but I'm speaking with our vets on a at least daily basis with updates on how all of our animals are doing. As I said, we've got almost 100 animals at the moment in the vets that are still being operated on, that are being treated for quite serious infections and diseases. We need to have those animals adopted out so that we can create more space in order to be able to bring more animals into the clinics. That's one of the big problems there, is that there's so many animals in need, and there's not a lot of space. There's not a lot of places for them to go. The sanctuaries are full up, and so we are really working hard to get as many of those animals adopted as we can, as quickly as we can, so that we can help more. And that's why it's so important to sterilize, because there are too many animals. There are far too many animals at the moment that need help, and more of them being born just makes it impossible.
Well, Mimi Bekhechi, and what is your official title now? Because I don't want to demote you by saying.
I'm Vice President of UK, Europe, and Australia.
Of course you are. But now, and being Vice President, I know you can't stop for a minute to do anything else but save an animal. But in those weak moments when you think, I've got to give up, this is so daunting, I can't. Is there an animal that you encountered in Turkey that makes you think, no, I can't stop. I have to.
Yes. Actually, there are several, but one, Judy, who is a German Shepherd mix that we found on the street, and somebody had. Obviously, a kind person had tried to help her. Her leg was very badly injured, and they had wrapped a scarf around her leg. But that was really gross, pussy, disgusting, and it had created a lot of infection in the wound. So initially, we thought that her leg was going to have to be amputated, but she spent a month getting treatment every day for her leg, and now she's doing great. And she's just, there's just something in her eyes. She's just such a joy to be around. And you can just see how grateful she is, and how kind she is, and how sweet she is. And I actually have her as a screensaver on my phone. I think about her every day. I just love her. But all of them, there's not a single one. All of the animals that we've taken and that we've helped have been just their own unique, special little souls. I think about them all every day, really.
And a screensaver of Judy.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
Yeah,
we're going to keep going for Judy. We're going to keep going.
exactly.
Okay. Mimi Bekhechi, thank you very much for joining us on the PETA podcast.
Thanks for having me.
And it's fun talking to you. And I can see just by mentioning Judy and the others, you get a little emotional.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, it's a very emotional situation. It's really hard to even try to explain the trauma of like what they've gone through, of seeing a country that's been totally destroyed, of the suffering on the scale that they're experiencing. It's really difficult.
Yeah. Well, Mimi, thank you really for your time and for telling the stories of Judy and the others. And thank goodness you got a dog in there, because we heard so many cats. The dog people were saying, wait, there had to be some dogs you saved.
Tarkan as well. Gorgeous. Well, actually, we saved a lot of dogs, but yeah.
Tarkan.
More cats.
Tarkan.
Mm-hmm.
That was his name.
That was his name. Yeah, we called him after Tarkan, the Turkish singer. Everybody knows. You know that song, like "Kiss Kiss."
Oh no, Tarkan. Well, tell me about Tarkan while we have you.
Well, Tarkan was one I told you about, who we found we thought was paralyzed.
Oh,
initially,
yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And
he's been adopted now last week after being at the vet for weeks from the recovering from his surgery from his broken leg. And he's just, I mean, special.
You can make it.
Yeah,
I mean,
he did.
He
has a new family in Adana, which is where our vet is and where he was being treated for weeks. So he didn't have to go far, which is great. And hopefully we'll definitely be seeing him again the next time we're there. We'll go visit him.
Well, when you go back, let us know and we'll talk to you again and just get an update on the situation there. And really, thanks for telling us the stories about all these animals that you helped there in Turkey.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Mimi Bekhechi, Vice President of PETA UK, Europe and Australia, on the month-long effort in Turkey to save animals after the earthquake of February 6, 2023. The deadliest earthquake in Turkey since 526, and the deadliest in Syria in 200 years. We'll be following what Bekhechi does in the future as she returns to Turkey and her efforts to get into Syria. The rescue effort, by the way, made possible by your generous donations to the PETA Global Compassion Fund. For updates, go to PETA.org. And that's our show for today. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to send a link of this show to your friends. Tell them you like the PETA podcast. You can contact us at PETA.org. You can find me on Twitter at Emil Amok. That's EMILAMOK. Or see my vlog at AMOK.com. Or see my work at ALDEF, the Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund. That's AALDEF.org/blog. Once again, thank you for listening. Check out all our episodes on your favorite podcast app or on Apple Podcasts, where you can subscribe to as well as rate and review the show. It helps get the word out about the issues you care about. Our music is provided by CarbonWorks. Check them out on YouTube. And join us again next time for more insight into animal rights and the fight for a cruelty-free world on the PETA Podcast. I'm Emil Guillermo.